Red Star Radio. Voice of the Revolution.
Now, when it comes to Baathism, which was practiced in Syria and Iraq and Egypt before all this, it's kind of a syncretic ideology that tries to merge far left anti-imperialism and secularism with far right ethno-nationalism, because the main struggle in Baathism is not the struggle of the workers, it's the struggle of the Arab peoples against, other forces, Persians, Israelis, Islamists, the West, all that kind of stuff. So with Baathism, you will essentially have a very militaristic regime and one that will favor heavy industry controlled by the state rather than by the workers. But on the other hand, you'll generally have equality for women, equality in theory for like certain minority groups, and equality in opportunity. You'll have workers' rights, guaranteed education and healthcare, all those sorts of things. So it's kind of like Iran, except like it's pan-Arab rather than Islamic. The main merit of this Ba'athist ideology, which is why the Soviets allied with them, is that it kept Islamic extremists down, and it prioritized being anti-West rather than being anti-imperialist. And the problem then is that these countries, the Ba'athist countries, wanted to essentially have economies under their own control, let the Arab people control it. And obviously the West didn't like that. And then you have the American invasion of Iraq, and now we have the Arab Spring, a lot of which was backed by the West. And a big problem with this is that when you overthrow secular Arab or Middle Eastern governments, you're going to create a power vacuum. And in this power vacuum, like how fascism rose in Germany, Islamofascism rose in Iraq and now in Syria. And this comes in the form of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or Al-Qaeda, if I'm going to pronounce it more correctly. And all they're doing is trying to replace the old order with an Islamofascist one that has a strict hierarchy, one that is ruled by faith alone, and one where only God gets to decide who is rich and who is poor, even though that makes no sense from a theological perspective. Now, I'm not saying the Ba'athist governments are spotless. Because Arab struggle was their main driver of ideology, rather than worker struggle, you had the aforementioned far-right elements in it. And this would include things like gassing Kurds and persecuting some Persian or Bangladeshi groups. It's nowhere near as bad as what the Gulf. Yeah, it's nowhere near as bad as what the Gulf does or what the Islamofascist countries are doing. But you had those problems. I'd say ultimately that the best thing that could have happened in Iraq and Syria regarding the Kurdish question was for northern and Iraq and Syria to give up its territory to the Kurds, and along with Turkey to give up its southern territory to the Kurds as well. But
which is never ever happening.
Yeah, because Erdogan's a crypto-Islamofascist. Like, face it, guys, he's supporting ISIS. He's buying oil from them. He prefers to attack the Kurds rather than the
Islamists who he's actually helping.
Yeah, and he has good ties with the Gulf countries. Because the thing is with the Middle East, it's probably the prime example of what happens when imperialists just draw borders without any regards as to who lives in that region. And you have conflicts between Arabs, Persians, Islamists, secular, internationalist Marxists, and pan-Arabs who don't see a difference between different Arab groups. And Syria is a pretty big testament to this, because in Syria you have the FSA, which is made up of a Sunni group, versus the Ba'athist pan-Arab Assad. But then the Ba'athist pan-Arabs have support from a lot of pro-Shiite, Alawite groups, but the pro-Shiite and pro-Alawite groups are nowhere near as bad as the Sunni extremists.
So the Alawites are Shia, right?
Yeah, the Alawites are Shia, but for some reason people count them as separate. Yeah. And then you have the Kurds who aren't Islamists, but they're Sunni, so they wouldn't accept being ruled by a Shia majority. And they're obviously not Arab, and they would rather have a crypto-Marxist government. And if this confuses you, well, then it should, because the Middle East is a complete political clusterfuck.
what happened was this chemical weapons attack was pulled off. Apparently, it hit, I guess, an FSA-controlled area, so they blamed it on Assad. And this is another example of truth by attrition, when Western media and rulers kept saying that it must have been Assad over and over again. Like, it was maybe Assad, it was probably Assad. This random piece of evidence says that it might have been Assad, and they just kept saying that it was the Assad government over and over and over again until the point where it was an accepted fact. And that's now another accepted fact that we have, right up next to the so-called fact that Iran is making nuclear weapons to wipe out Israel.
Right.
And it's important because I think that was the major breaking point of when the U.S. finally openly said, we are arming the FSA and these quote-unquote moderate rebels, which, I mean, I suppose some of the Islamist groups in the FSA aren't as extreme as others, but it's still pretty astounding how quick the turnaround was from the end of the Iraq War, where they were fighting Al-Qaeda in the surge in Iraq, right? That's who they were fighting.
Right.
So the Iraq War finishes, and then only a few years later are they basically arming Al-Qaeda.
Right.
Like, they don't even wait a whole decade or so, like they did in Afghanistan with the Mujahideen turning into the Taliban. It was literally a turnaround of just a few years when they're all of a sudden arming their enemies again. And then of course the whole ISIS head chopping videos start going around on the internet, and they turn it around again and they say, oh, well, now there's these Islamist wackos. You know what I mean? It's just astounding. Not only how opportunistic they are and how quickly it turns around, but how obedient the media can be in not pointing these things out, in obediently saying Assad was the one who dropped these chemical weapons. Not that Daesh isn't barbaric enough, but just the fact that they obsess over them selectively, when what exactly is the major difference between their extreme authoritarian theocracy and the way how Saudi Arabia operates?
Yeah.
Like why exactly are we supposed to be so selectively outraged about them when Arabia has been in the chopping heads business for so long?
This is what I believe. It's like as if the United States is betting on a gambit that the Islamic State, if it ever reaches power, will become an Islamic theocracy like Saudi Arabia and magically have pro-Western relations and whatnot. That's like best Salafism, Wahhabism, all that bullshit. Because like the thing is that if ISIS is trading oil with Turkey, they probably think that it'll trade oil with the United States, because at least they're not going to be Baathists who want the own Arabs to control their own things. They're gonna, in their attempts to be an Islamo-fascist state, they'll probably start doing the illegal implicit trade with the West. From what I see, I don't know if they do win and there's a magical so-called liberalization, and by that they mean they're suddenly pro-West, all bets are off as to what the United States was doing this entire time. Either that or the United States is just completely stupid by funding rebels that say, hey, we're Islamists, please give us weapons, we'll kill Assad for you, okay? It's not like we'll behead you or anything. And America's like, sure, partner, freedom. That's how I see it. So that's my take on Syria. One gigantic clusterfuck.